Donald Trump's tariffs marked a dramatic break from decades of American-led free trade, sparking fierce debate. Were these tariffs a strategic move to protect American workers, or a risky gamble that could unravel the global economic order? The impact is personal. Tariffs affect the prices we pay and the jobs we hold. Supporters see them as a necessary shock to revive American industry. Critics warn of higher prices and global instability. To understand this high-stakes experiment, we must look beyond rhetoric and examine the real arguments and consequences. When Donald Trump took office in 2017, he promised to shake up America's approach to global trade. His tariff policy was sweeping and aggressive, representing a dramatic shift from the strategies of previous administrations. Trump's team believed that the U.S. had been taken advantage of for decades, and they set out to rewrite the rules of international commerce. The new tariffs didn't just target America's traditional rivals, they also hit long-standing allies. Trump's administration argued that the U.S. needed to protect its own interests, even if that meant upsetting old partnerships and alliances. The most high-profile target was China. Trump imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods, ranging from electronics and machinery to everyday consumer products. The administration accused China of unfair trade practices, including forced technology transfers and widespread intellectual property theft, and insisted that tough action was necessary to level the playing field. Some tariffs reached as high as 25%, affecting a vast array of products. American manufacturers, especially those in steel and electronics, felt both the intended protection and the unintended consequences: higher costs for imported materials and components. But China wasn't the only target. Trump also slapped tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from close allies like Canada, Mexico, and the European Union. He justified these moves by citing national security concerns, arguing that a strong domestic metals industry was vital for America's defense. The administration's goal was twofold: to force China to change its economic behavior and to pressure America's allies to support U.S. industry, even if it meant renegotiating long-standing trade agreements. Trump's message was clear. He wanted to bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. and make American industry more competitive on the world stage. He often spoke directly to workers, promising that his tough stance would revive factories and restore lost jobs. This marked a sharp break from decades of bipartisan support for free trade. For years, both Democrats and Republicans had championed open markets and international cooperation, believing that free trade would benefit everyone. Trump rejected that consensus, arguing that previous deals had hollowed out American industry. Trump's approach was rooted in the idea that trade is a zero-sum game. If another country wins, America loses. He saw tariffs not just as taxes, but as powerful leverage to force other countries to the negotiating table and extract better terms for the U.S. In effect, it was a declaration that the old rules no longer applied. Trump's trade war sent shockwaves through the global economy, signaling that the era of automatic free trade was over, and that America was now willing to play hardball to protect its own interests. For more than 70 years, the United States stood at the forefront of a global movement, championing a system built on the ideals of free trade and open markets. In the aftermath of World War II, American leaders believed that fostering economic ties between nations would not only drive prosperity, but also help prevent future conflicts. The vision was simple, yet ambitious. By weaving the economies of the world together, nations would become less likely to go to war, and more likely to cooperate for mutual benefit. This belief in economic interdependence shaped decades of U.S. policy. American officials worked tirelessly to lower trade barriers, encourage cross-border investment, and promote the free flow of goods and services. The hope was that as countries became more economically connected, they would share in the rewards of growth, innovation, and stability. To make this vision a reality, the United States helped create powerful institutions like the World Trade Organization. These organizations set the rules of the game, providing a framework for resolving disputes and ensuring that trade remained fair and predictable. Through these efforts, the U.S. positioned itself as both a leader and a beneficiary of the global trading system. For many years, American consumers reaped the benefits. Store shelves filled with affordable products from around the world, while U.S. companies gained access to new markets, fueling job growth and innovation at home. The promise of globalization seemed within reach, but by the early 2000s, cracks began to appear in the system. Critics argued that the rules were being bent or even broken, especially by China, whose rapid rise as a manufacturing powerhouse unsettled established norms. Headlines questioned whether the global system was truly fair, or if some countries were taking advantage of it at the expense of others. China faced accusations of unfair trade practices, including government subsidies for key industries, manipulating its currency to boost exports, and widespread theft of intellectual property. These actions, critics claimed, gave China an artificial edge, undermining American businesses and workers. The impact was felt most acutely in America's industrial heartland. As factories shuttered and jobs moved overseas, many communities were left struggling. The promise of shared prosperity seemed to ring hollow for those who saw their livelihoods disappear, fueling a growing sense of frustration and betrayal. Against this backdrop, President Trump and his advisors argued that the old system no longer served America's interests. They claimed that decades of multilateral agreements had left the U.S. vulnerable, and that it was time to put American workers and industries first. Their solution was bold and controversial: abandon the traditional multilateral approach in favor of an America-first strategy. This meant renegotiating trade deals, imposing tariffs, and taking a tougher stance against countries seen as unfair competitors. With these moves, the stage was set for a dramatic and radical shift in U.S. trade policy, one that would challenge the very foundations of the global system America had once built and led. The world watched closely as the future of international trade entered a new and uncertain era. Supporters of Trump's tariffs argue they're essential to protect and rebuild American manufacturing. Tariffs make imports more expensive, encouraging consumers and businesses to buy American. The goal level the playing field against countries with subsidies, low wages, and lax regulations. Tariffs can offset unfair advantages, giving U.S. industries a fighting chance. They're also seen as leverage, forcing countries like China to negotiate and make real concessions. The vision: short-term pain for long-term gain with new jobs and investment in American industry. The hope is a virtuous cycle: more factories, more jobs, and a stronger, more resilient economy. A key test of tariffs is whether they bring manufacturing back to the U.S., a process called reshoring. Supporters point to companies like Nucor and U.S. Steel expanding domestic operations after tariffs. Tariffs change the math: importing becomes pricier, so sourcing locally makes sense. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the risks of global supply chains, adding urgency to reshoring. However, the shift has been slow and limited. Decades of offshoring can't be reversed overnight. Moving production back is costly and complex. While there are success stories, a full-scale manufacturing renaissance remains a long-term goal. The reality progress is real, but incremental. Critics warn tariffs are a tax on Americans, raising prices for consumers and businesses. When the U.S. imposes tariffs, other countries retaliate, targeting American exports like soybeans and machinery. This tit-for-tat hurts U.S. exporters and can devastate entire industries. The policy picks winners and losers, helping some sectors while harming others. Critics argue the jobs lost in exporting industries may outnumber those gained in protected ones. There's also a risk of alienating allies and undermining the global system America built. The result? Uncertainty, higher costs, and a more fragile international order. At the heart of the economic debate in America lies a fundamental question: should we prioritize creating more domestic jobs, or focus on keeping prices low for everyone? This is the classic jobs versus prices dilemma, and it affects nearly every household and business in the country. On one side, there's the promise of more employment opportunities, especially in manufacturing and related industries. On the other, there's the reality that higher costs can make everyday life more expensive for millions of families. Tariffs, which are taxes on imported goods, are often used as a tool to make American-made products more competitive. By making foreign goods more expensive, tariffs can encourage consumers and businesses to buy products made in the USA. This can lead to more jobs in factories, warehouses, and supply chains across the country. For many communities, especially those hit hard by globalization and factory closures, these new jobs can be a lifeline, bringing hope and stability back to local economies. However, there's a flip side. Tariffs also tend to raise prices for consumers, since companies often pass the extra costs on to shoppers. This means that everything from groceries to appliances can become more expensive. For lower and middle-income families who already feel the pinch of tight budgets, These price increases can be especially tough. The extra dollars spent at the checkout counter can add up quickly, making it harder to save or afford other essentials. For some people, landing a new job or seeing their community thrive is worth the higher prices. They see tariffs as an investment in American workers and the nation's future. For others, the immediate impact of rising costs outweighs the potential benefits, especially if they don't work in industries protected by tariffs. For them, every price hike is another strain on an already stretched household budget. This is the central dilemma. Is it better to pay more for goods and support local jobs, or to keep costs low, even if that means more jobs move overseas? The answer isn't simple, and it often depends on where you live, what you do for a living, and how much you can afford to spend. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. Your perspective on tariffs and trade-offs is shaped by your personal circumstances, your job, your family's needs, and your community's economic health. What feels like a win for one person might feel like a loss for another. Tariffs create both winners and losers, and sometimes the effects are obvious, like a factory reopening or a store closing. Other times the impact is hidden, showing up in subtle ways, like a family cutting back on groceries or a business struggling to compete. This trade-off between jobs and prices is at the very heart of the national debate. It's a conversation that shapes policy, influences elections, and affects the daily lives of millions of Americans. As the country continues to grapple with these choices, the question remains, what kind of economy do we want to build for the future? Trump's tariffs sent shockwaves through the global economy, triggering retaliation from China and the EU. Countries hit back with their own tariffs, targeting sensitive U.S. industries and escalating trade tensions. Many nations began forging new trade agreements that exclude the U.S., reducing their reliance on American markets. Companies scrambled to diversify supply chains, moving production out of China to places like Vietnam and Mexico. This China Plus One strategy is costly and disruptive, but it's reshaping global trade. America's leadership in free trade is now in question. The world is becoming more fragmented and competitive. The long-term consequences are still unfolding. Trump's tariffs forced America to rethink its role in the global economy. Supporters see a bold defense of American workers and a push for fairer trade. Critics see higher costs, damaged alliances, and a retreat from global leadership. The policy has created both winners and losers, helping some, hurting others. The debate is about more than economics. It's about values and the future we want. As citizens, we must weigh the trade-offs and decide which path leads to a stronger, more secure America. The story isn't over, and the choice is ours.